The barn was packed so tight that a person could hardly move, but the moment Lance Chambers stepped inside, the whole place seemed to shift. Folks didn't turn to greet him. They turned to stare. The auction house smelled of hay, leather, and old money, the kind of place where million-dollar horses changed hands and reputations rose and fell with the swing of a gavel. But Lance didn't smell like money. He smelled like dust, cold nights, and sleeping under bridges. His jacket was patched with duct tape. His boots had holes worn clean through. And yet there he stood, clutching a wrinkled catalog he had fished from a trash can outside, staring at the photos of horses he had no business dreaming about. But Lance had come anyway, because today, Lot 49 was more than a horse. It was his last tie to a life he had lost, Diamond's legacy. A Palomino mare with a bloodline traced straight back to the horse his late wife Catherine had raised, when they still believed the world was kind. Lance had once owned 2,000 acres in Montana, a ranch filled with strong horses and stronger hopes. But when Catherine got sick, everything went to medical bills. The land, the livestock, their savings, even their home. He had slept in his truck until the bank took that too. Now he lived under an overpass, saving every dollar he could find or earn for months. $847. That was all he had in the world. And he knew it wasn't enough. Not even close. The auctioneer, a tall man with silver hair named Vernon Pearson, stepped up to the podium. His voice carried like a church bell through the barn. Ladies and gentlemen, we now reach the highlight of today's sale. Lot 49, Diamond's Legacy. The giant screens flickered on, showing the mare in motion. She ran barrels like lightning had taken the shape of a horse, golden mane flying, muscles coiled and powerful. The crowd murmured with excitement. "We'll start at 150,000, Vernon called. A paddle flew up instantly, then another. The price started climbing like sparks up dry brush. 175,000, 200, 225. Lance stood in the back, heart pounding. Every new bid was like a door slamming shut. By $290,000, only two people were still bidding. Clayton Westbrook, a rancher who owned half of Wyoming, and Vivian Summers, a woman whose boots probably cost more than Lance once made in a month. 300,000, Vernon called out, going once. Lance swallowed hard. He told himself he had come only to watch, to honor Catherine, to say goodbye to the last piece of her bloodline. But something inside him pushed forward, something brave or foolish or both. He raised his hand. $847. The entire barn froze. Hundreds of faces turned at once. The silence was thick, then broke like glass. Laughter. Loud, cruel, echoing through the rafters. Men doubled over. Someone fell out of a chair. A woman covered her mouth, trying to hide her smile, but she failed. A ranch hand shouted, "Did he say 800?" Another yelled, "For a $300,000 horse?" Someone called for security. Vernon blinked in confusion. "Sir, the bid is 300,000. Did you perhaps mean 300? "No," Lance said softly but steady. $847. It's everything I have." The laughter grew sharper. Lance stood alone in that storm of mockery, his face burning but his eyes fixed forward. He thought of Catherine sitting atop the grandmother of this very mare, laughing in the sun, hair blowing like wildfire. He thought of her hand in his as she whispered her last words, "Don't forget who you are." Then a voice cut through the noise. "Sit down, Clayton." The entire barn fell silent again. An old man in the third row had risen. He wore a faded flannel shirt and jeans that looked like they had lived a real cowboy's life. Deep lines cut across his face, the kind you earn through work and weather, not money. His name was Winston Colby, a rancher so respected that when he spoke, men like Clayton Westbrook stopped talking. He looked straight at Lance. "You in the back," he said. "Come here." Lance hesitated, but Winston waved him forward with a firm hand. The crowd parted as he walked down the aisle like he carried a disease nobody wanted to catch. When he reached the front, Winston shook his hand. "I knew your wife," Winston said. "Knew her grandmother even better. They were the finest horsewomen these states ever saw." Lance's chest tightened. You knew Catherine?" "I did. And I know what you lost." Winston turned toward the auctioneer. "What's the current bid?" "300,000, Vernon said, still stunned. "I'm bidding 350,000, Winston said. The barn gasped as one. Vivian Summers stood. "Winston, what are you doing?" "Buying a horse," he said calmly, "unless you plan to bid against me." But nobody dared. 350,000, Vernon called. "Sold." The gavel struck. Winston turned to Lance and said something that made the entire barn forget how to breathe. "The mare's yours, son." Lance stood frozen, his mind struggling to keep up with reality. The great barn that had mocked him moments ago now sat in stunned silence. Winston Colby, the legend of 3 states, had just bought a $350,000 mare and was handing her to a man who owned nothing but a patched jacket and a broken heart. I can't take her," Lance stammered. "I don't have anything. I can't repay." "You're not repaying," Winston cut in. "You're honoring a promise your wife made long before she got sick. Catherine believed you had a gift with horses. So did her grandmother. They weren't wrong." His voice softened. "You saved $847 living on the streets just to stand here today. That tells me everything I need to know." The whispering crowd shifted, embarrassed now instead of amused. Even Clayton Westbrook stared at his boots. Vivian Summers, who earlier outbid half the room with a smile, stepped forward and offered Lance her hand. "I'm sorry," she said plainly. "You showed more courage here today than most of us ever have." Others followed. A ranch owner offered free boarding. A farrier said he'd shoe the mare at no cost. A veterinarian promised a full health check. The same people who had laughed now seemed desperate to make it right. Vernon Pearson waved Lance toward the podium. "Mr. Chambers," he said gently, "if you'll sign the paperwork and pay your $847, Diamond's legacy is officially yours." When Lance handed over the envelope of crumpled bills, his hands shook so badly he could barely count. Each dollar had come from long nights, cold mornings, and quiet prayers. When the last bill left his hand, a strange calm settled over him. He owned her. He actually owned her. Winston helped load Diamond's legacy into his trailer and motioned for Lance to climb into his truck. They drove out of town, the Montana prairie rolling wide beneath a sky that looked endless. After a few miles, Lance gathered the courage to ask, "Why me? Why do all this for a stranger?" Winston didn't look over. "Because I wasn't always a man with land. 40 years ago I lost everything. Drought wiped out my cattle. My house burned. I slept in my truck until Alice Chambers, your wife's grandmother, sold me her best filly for $53. I begged her not to. But she said, when a man's trying to stand, you don't kick the ground out from under him." Quote. He paused. "Everything I built came from that filly. This," he motioned to the world around them, "exists because someone helped me when I had nothing. You don't pay a gift like that back. You pay it forward." When they reached Winston's ranch, he pulled up near a small house tucked beside a weathered barn. "This old foreman's place hasn't been used in years," he said. "Needs work, but it's yours if you want it. Free rent. You help me on the ranch. It's not charity, it's a job. You earn your keep." Lance felt his throat tighten. "Winston, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Winston replied. "Say you'll fight your way back." So Lance said yes. The first days were hard. His body was weak from months of sleeping rough. His muscles shook from work. But every morning he walked out to the barn and saw Diamond's legacy tossing her golden mane, and a fire lit inside him again. He fixed the foreman's house one board at a time. Dorothy Colby brought blankets and old pots and pans, pretending she had simply found them in storage. Lance scrubbed floors, patched roofs, and mended fences. By the end of the week, the house felt less like a shelter and more like a beginning. But the moment that changed everything came the first time he led Diamond into the paddock. She stepped out into the open space, lifted her head, and ran. The sun turned her mane into fire. Her hooves struck the earth like thunder. Lance took out the old photograph of Catherine riding the mare's grandmother. "I got her, Cat," he whispered. I found our legacy. Over the next months, Lance and Winston worked side by side. Lance fed horses before dawn and trained them until sunset. The long days rebuilt his strength. The fresh air rebuilt his spirit. The work gave him purpose again. Diamond trusted him quickly, almost like she sensed the connection through generations. By the second month, she followed his voice like a dog. By the third, she nuzzled his shoulder when he walked past. One evening, Winston found Lance sketching out breeding plans at the barn table. "Planning Diamond's future?" he asked. "Trying to," Lance admitted. "Her bloodline is too good to waste, but I need the right stallion." Winston sat down. "You know horses, son, really know them. I've met a lot of breeders who can read pedigrees, not many who can read a horse's heart." He took a breath. "I want to sponsor her first foal. I'll cover the stud fees. In return, when you're back on your feet, you help improve my breeding program the same way your Catherine's family once helped me." Lance rose and offered his hand. "Then we have a deal." They shook hands under the warm barn light, sealing a partnership built not on money but on respect. Spring came early that year. Diamond's legacy was bred to River's command. A stallion with strength, grace, and a gentle heart. The match felt right the moment Lance saw them stand nose to nose. 11 months later, Lance delivered a Palomino filly with a white blaze shaped like a rising sun. He named her Catherine's Dream. Her birth was the moment the world shifted again, though Lance didn't know it yet. The filly stood strong, bright-eyed, with a presence that made even Winston whisper, "This one's different." And out there on Winston's ranch, on 20 borrowed acres, with a mare the world said he wasn't worthy of, Lance Chambers began to build back a life no one had expected him to have. But the world wasn't done surprising him yet. Catherine's Dream grew into the kind of horse people talked about in feed stores and rodeo stands. Even as a young filly, she moved with a grace that felt almost unreal. She trusted Lance completely, following him like a shadow, learning faster than any horse he had ever trained. Word spread across Montana that the homeless rancher with the $847 miracle had bred a filly better than her champion mother. Still, Lance refused to sell her. Some things weren't for sale. The years passed with steady work and a rebuilt purpose. Diamond's legacy had foals that sold for tens of thousands. Lance's breeding program grew from a dream into a respected name. Children came to learn from him. Parents trusted him. And the horse community that once laughed now watched him with admiration. One spring morning, a familiar luxury SUV pulled up to Winston's arena. Vivian Summers stepped out with her teenage daughter, Lily, who stood stiff in expensive riding clothes. Lance smiled politely. "What can I do for you, Vivian?" Vivian rested her hand on Lily's shoulder. "I want my daughter to learn what you know, not just riding. Horsemanship, character, the things money can't buy." Lance studied the girl. She had talent but relied too much on polished horses and fancy tack. "I'll train her," Lance said, "but on one condition, no special treatment. She does the work, she mucks stalls, she cleans tack, she learns the hard way." Vivian nodded. "That's why we're here." The first day nearly broke Lily. Her hands blistered, her clothes got dirty, her pride cracked. But something changed after that. She started showing up early. She asked questions. She watched Lance with Diamond and Catherine's Dream, soaking in his calm way with horses. Months later, Lily rode one of Lance's young geldings. Nothing flashy, just a good, honest horse, and placed second at a major competition. Not because of the horse, but because she had learned to be the rider her horse needed. Vivian hugged Lance afterward with tears in her eyes. "You gave my daughter something I couldn't. Thank you." News spread fast after that. Parents lined up to enroll their kids. Donations came in. A local businessman sold Lance a 50-acre property at a price so low it felt like a blessing. Lance turned it into a full training facility with 2 assistants, new stalls, and a youth program he named the Catherine Chambers Foundation for Equine Education. 5 years after the auction, Lance received a call from Vernon Pearson, the same auctioneer who once stood confused as Lance bid his last $847. "Lance," Vernon said, We're hosting a charity auction for people facing homelessness. I'd like you to be our keynote speaker." Lance hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that." "You are exactly the right person," Vernon said quietly. "5 years ago, people laughed at you in my barn. I allowed it. I've regretted it ever since." So Lance agreed. The night of the event, he walked into the same barn where the world had once mocked him. But now, people rose to their feet. Respect filled the air. He told his story the only way he knew how, with honesty. What it meant to lose everything. What it meant to fight anyway. What it meant when one man saw his worth. "I'm not special," Lance said, voice steady. "I'm someone who got a second chance. Someone gave me a door to walk through. All I did was walk." The entire room stood and clapped. Vernon wiped tears as he introduced donations that had poured in, over $2 million for people who needed a hand up, not a handout. After the speech, Clayton Westbrook approached, hat in hand. "Lance, I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one. I was wrong. If you'll allow it, I'd like to donate a breeding to my top stallion. No charge." Lance gripped his hand. Apology accepted. Life kept growing from there. Catherine's dream became a champion many times over. Diamond's legacy produced foals that carried her fire across the West. Lance's youth program turned troubled kids into confident riders. Some went on to become trainers, breeders, and competitors. Others simply became better people. Winston and Dorothy retired to Arizona, but not before Winston pulled Lance aside and handed him a deed. "The original 20 acres, Winston said softly, "where you started. It's yours now. Seems right." Lance tried to refuse, but Winston cut him short. "Alice gave me my start. I gave you yours. Now you give others theirs. That's how we honor the folks who believed in us." 5 years later, Winston passed peacefully in his sleep. Lance cried for the man who had saved him, guided him, believed in him when no one else did. But every time Lance trained a young rider or foaled a new horse or told someone they had potential, he felt Winston's spirit standing with him. 10 years after the day he bid $847, Lance was invited to receive the first Alice Chambers Award for Equine Excellence. He stood on the same podium where laughter once cut him down, now facing a crowd full of people whose lives his horses had touched. He held the award and said, "This belongs to every person who's ever been dismissed, every person who had nothing but kept going, every person who needed one chance." In the back row, Lance saw a young man holding an auction catalog with hands that trembled from fear and hope. His clothes were worn. His eyes were tired. Lance recognized himself. He walked over after the ceremony. "I'm Lance. What's your name?" "Daniel. Daniel Wright, sir." "You like horses, Daniel?" Daniel nodded. "My family used to train cutting horses. We lost everything. I'm trying to start again." Lance handed him a business card. "Come see me Monday morning, 7 sharp. I need help at my facility. You'll learn, you'll work, and you'll get your chance." Daniel blinked. "Sir, are you serious?" "Dead serious." Daniel showed up. He worked hard. He learned fast. Within years, he became one of the finest trainers in Montana and now manages the Foundation's main program. And every anniversary of the auction, Lance walks into the paddock at sunset with the photograph he always carries. Catherine's dream grazes nearby with her foals. Diamond's legacy rests under the cottonwoods she loved, and the land, 200 acres now, glows in the golden Montana evening. "We did it, Cat," Lance whispers. "Your dream lived. Your bloodline lived. Your kindness lived." Then he smiles at the memory of the day 300 people laughed at a homeless man with $847. Because no one laughs now.